You're now listening to New Models. Welcome to New Models. This special episode features texts by Ben Davis, Gavin Brown, Jason Farago, Tobias Spichtig, Joshua Citarella, Lloyd Wise, and Caroline Busta, excerpted from the publication What is Contemporary Art for Today, which was published by the Perić Collection in summer 2025. The readings follow. For access to the full episode, including a conversation with the book's editors, Dean Kissick, Eleonore, Hugendubel, and Matt Moravec, visit New Models on Patreon or Substack.
I'm Ben Davis. I'm the author of 9.5 Theses on Art in Class and Art in the Afterculture, and I am currently the national art critic for ArtNet News. I know many of the things that people think are wrong with contemporary art. Its commitment to liberal political sentimentality, its distraction by gimmicks and PR, its substitution of money for merit. I feel all this. But the truth is that, as Nietzsche said, you can endure any what if you have a why. And I think that, if I'm honest, the biggest problem is the general breakdown of the sense that art is meaningful. Since finding meaning in it is the job of an art critic, I can be honest and say that my sense of what is wrong with art is inseparable from the miserable situation of writing about it. Well, being a writer of niche interests has probably never been so awesome. But when I started writing about art in the 2000s, before the web had displaced physical publications, there was no question that any art show in a gallery was a potential subject. And time-wise, you didn't have to write about things when they were on view. Sometimes the big essay on a show would drop months later. Now it's near impossible to get an editor to justify on pure cost-benefit terms writing about a show by a non-famous artist based on the small potential audience. Worse, everything is relentlessly present-oriented, pitched at the current moment, which also means that there's less room for writers to respond to each other over time, so that a work accumulates durable meaning. The truth is, every cultural sphere I can think of is in commercial and creative trouble. Books, comics, music, movies, television, even, believe it or not, video games. It's hard to justify the time invested in any kind of serious creative enterprise when everything competes in one feed for attention and nothing sticks around for long. Even social media, which was the initial cause of the loss of context and acceleration of media in the 2010s, is now in trouble. Capital has discovered that letting actual humans you choose to follow determine when you are engaged is inefficient. Better to just have an algorithm serve you an interminable feed of fascinations. When people say that everything feels like content, not art, this is what they mean, that all culture is being sucked into this stream, reshaping itself around the demands of this form of consumption. The sense of participating in a tradition, unfolding over time, with something special to say. The sense that first inspired me to be interested in art when I saw Robert Hughes's forceful documentary series on modern art, The Shock of the New, sitting in the back of college art history, breaks down. What do I want art to be? I have this vague hope that art's weakness might be its strength. Art is badly designed to compete on the attention terrain, media-wise, because most of it is still a niche, self-selecting interest. The general decline of close social ties and participation in group organizations is one of the major societal challenges today. The hyper-commodification of culture that turns everyone into isolated producer-consumers of screen time, responding to a conversation that is everywhere and nowhere, is one culprit. So somehow, the idea of art as a community of people that forms around debating some strange and specific thing and finds significance in its strangeness and specificity feels important. It's almost more important to me than what the thing itself is.
I am Gavin Brown. I moved to New York in 1988. I am still here. What is contemporary art? What is it for? It's the stuff that's extruded out through each new today of this contemporary moment, landing right in front of us, repeatedly, again and again, over and over, with a crash. What is it for? To fill in space in that new today, to take up space until it's not contemporary anymore and is just getting in the way, piling up, bigger and bigger. But like the modern, the contemporary has outgrown its new boots. That competitive race for the contemporary prizes, in which our noses push at the edge of unfolding culture, like a constantly receding finish line tape, was all gasps, laughs, and sharp elbows. But today, it just feels like an unrelenting treadmill. To me, anyway. What can the contemporary mean or feel like when you're 60? And in a world of global culture and species-wide simultaneity, the late 20th century Western white monopoly on defining the contemporary is past its shelf life. As we all gaze together across the landscape of contemporary human experience, today and tomorrow, we cannot avoid seeing and knowing a contemporary so traumatic, so abject in its reality for most, and yet so carefree in its rendering of itself, in the name of a very, very few, that it strains at its own seams to the point of a willful insanity. Just so with the contemporary and contemporary art. The question then becomes not what is it for, because given the overwhelming mass of the contemporary human experience in struggle, the question is, what are we doing? In our present formulation inside this microscopic world, contemporary art is now fully tethered to the carefree, capitally saturated few. Art in this formulation is a way for the luxury preppers to communicate, a way for them to recognize each other and know they agree on the terms of their demented luxury conversation. It is a lingua franca at the end of the world. If survival was the first creative act, then today it increasingly feels like it will be the last. So I hope we can return soon to some kind of extreme, radical subjectivity and vulnerability outside of exchange and transaction. Because as we approach the outer edges of what the Jaya can hold, I need to know another's experience, to feel some commonality in the knowledge of the communication. That is what art is for. It has no function outside of expression and connection. We are social animals, and our cosmic gift is connecting. And our most wonderful tool to do so is what we call art.
This is Joshua Citarella. I'm an artist and internet culture writer based in New York. I'm the host of the podcast Doomscroll and the founder of Do Not Research. Contemporary art is the professional field that does not abide by the discipline of any other field. If you're a journalist, activist, technologist, historian, anthropologist, or something else, there are strict rules around publishing, such as peer review, proper sources, and citation. But in art, you can pretty much do whatever you want. Artists are encouraged to make intuitive and data-agnostic connections. This extraordinary openness is art's greatest strength and its greatest weakness. Art can be an incredibly generative field that derives unique cultural insights that could not have emerged elsewhere, such as Cahole's normcore. But art can also be a place where amateurs make baseless claims about irrelevant topics. This is more so the case recently. Art is the permission space within which we may break society's rules in an attempt to generate new ideas. It is a social process that may be used to reinforce or to radically transform the existing culture. In its most literal application, art will allow us to display iconographies of competing ideologies in government buildings. In most cases, it just challenges our old assumptions. While institutions have become increasingly rigid, the great flexibility of professional art uniquely positions artists to lead the discourse. But it does not seem likely that today's artists will rise to meet this task anytime soon. Recently, art has become a depoliticized form of activism. This project has been so successful that many of us have forgotten what art did before. Critics from the left pointed out that this narrow focus on rhetoric was used to paper over the necessary inequality that allows the industry to function. They preferred political economic fixes and programs of universal redistribution. Critics from the right complained that entrenched moralizing stripped art of its transgressive potential. They argue that the right to offend, delineating the boundaries of morality through negation, was essential to the social function of art. For the space of a few years, most artists, curators, and institutions forgot that poetry touched the human soul in a way that politics never could. This function is unique to art and does not overlap with any existing field. It's necessary to acknowledge that politics is also getting worse. Americans are downwardly mobile, and most middle-class people can't participate in art anymore. As a result, the field has become stagnant and trapped in 20th century forms. Liberal democracy as a whole is creaking and groaning under the weight of neoliberalism. And when push comes to shove, professional artists know they are on the wrong side of a growing class war. This leaves artists with little to do other than mimic the shifting affectations of the court. Under these conditions, they are reduced to making safe financial assets that do not challenge the status quo. Artists stopped trying to change the world and just adapted to it. Most of the interesting people in my generation have already left to do something else.
Hi, my name is Jason Farago. I'm a writer and critic in New York City, where I serve as critic at large at the New York Times. Previously, I was the editor of Even, a magazine I co-founded in 2015, and I had the honor of being the second guest at the Seaport Talks. I'm recording this not from New York, but from the much more bucolic climes of Williamstown, Massachusetts, in the shadow of the Clark Art Institute, pretty literally in the shadow of Western art history. Here's my text. What is contemporary art for? If your girl only knew, as Aaliyah once had it, if only a moment as shapeless as ours permitted the sort of exclusionary judgments, this but not that, this way to the future, that we still nostalgically feel to be our modern birthright. I'd have had a better answer to that question for you when I was younger. I came of age, came to art, at a strange hinge moment in political and cultural history, the late 1990s and 2000s. It was the high watermark of globalization, of pullulating biennials and perpetual fairs. It was a time when digital media allowed faster communication and discovery, but had not yet gobbled up our minds and democracies wholesale. As recently as 15 years ago, getting on a plane to Sao Paulo or Sydney, Kassel or Gwangju, was the surest way to discover the direction of culture, to suss out, in the arguments of curators and the gossip in the nightclubs, the subsequent chapter of art history that the entire world, and not just New York or the European capitals, was now writing all together. Those look almost like halcyon days from this distance, a quarter of the way into a century that seems to be leaving no cultural mark whatsoever, and that has also undergone a reprovincialization and re-regionalization to fit the molds of our algorithmic silos. The curator Okwin Wezer, introducing his Documenta of 2002 with characteristic swagger, described this new time as, quote, an already less than promising century, when the century was still only 1 year old. But neither he nor I, filling up our passport pages en route from biennial to fair to school to gallery, foresaw the near total explosion of art as a category of aesthetic experience that the phone and the platform would soon detonate. We believed, and we were excited, that digital technologies would require the century's artists to become media operators. And Wezer's Documenta contained more video than any one spectator could watch over its 100 days. The curator Nicolas Bourriaud argued that 21st century art would be an enterprise of post-production, something more akin to DJing than to drawing. But what we failed to imagine was that spectators would take the digital hit even harder than we did. The digital transformation that ended up mattering was not digital production, but digital reception. The apparatuses in our hands that equated art with every other strain of content and slayed Kantian autonomy once and for all. Those apparatuses define the experience of art as absolutely as the white cube did in the last century, or the church and the court did before that. And they have been 1,000 times more consequential than the minuscule changes that digital production tools, whether Photoshop or CNC printing or your favorite AI plagiarism engine, have had on an art sector as in love with the handmade as it ever was. Those apparatuses have triggered what Barry Schwabsky was the first to identify as the biggest shift in art's ontological status in 2 centuries. An abandonment of art as a collection of expressive innovations meant to be appreciated on their own terms, which was the definition we worked with since at least the French Revolution, and a redefinition of art as an evangelical undertaking, whose meaning or message can, like any content, be transmitted equally by the thing itself as by its digital representation. Should we have expected any better? Did we provide any reasons? Did we create any pictures or craft any objects that should have led our peers to say, you know, you are right. It is true. Art is something we cannot live without. I don't think the end could have come as fast as it did if it hadn't been for my own generation's stunning cultural underachievement, and how amid war, through financial crisis, and into ecological meltdown, we could not find one new thing to say. I mean, for crying out loud, it is 2025, and Pierre Huyghe, a silver fox at 62, is still running us ragged. So perhaps it now behooves us millennials, the generation that achieved nothing, to stop pretending we will reach cultural significance one day soon, and instead to ask ourselves, what conditions drove us to junk our artistic liberty for the beggar's price of likes and shares? Once life was not content, once culture was more than content, and one function of contemporary art is to model, through its constitutional inability to be summarized or utilized, a freedom that we never really bothered to defend. It is a small role. It is no great recompense, but we have learned how to live without great things.
Hi, my name is Lloyd Wise. I am a director at Garth Greenan Gallery in New York. Previously, I was an editor at Artforum magazine, where I served from 2007 through 2025. I have been worried about the conservatism of recent art practice. I don't mean the obvious conservatism of the mostly bad landscape painting, figuration, and portraiture that is now, at last, in free fall at the auction houses. I am worried about the conservatism of the abstract and conceptual art I like, or rather the art I have spent years trying to advocate for and support, the art I think is good. Not long ago, I visited a group show with several well-known-ish downtown artists whose careers I have followed closely. Individually, these artists are strong, thoughtful about their practices, and attentive to the world around them. But walking through the show that afternoon, I couldn't shake how old-fashioned everything looked. Resin-soaked fabric torqued into an interesting shape, found wood and metal arranged into a diminutive pile, a photograph of a performance involving a bedsheet in a field. The work on display, deeply indebted to the advanced art of the 1960s and 70s, relied heavily on tropes and procedures like assemblage, the ready-made, and the ephemeral in ways that would not have been out of place at the Castelli warehouse some 50 years ago. Here was the coolest art in New York, and it looked like something our grandparents could have made. This was especially galling given what was happening in the news at the time. I don't remember the headlines exactly, but suffice it to say they elided with the generalized ambience of doom and upheaval that defines life in the 2020s, with its dizzying technological acceleration, profound shifts in perception and attention, political extremism, and war. The art, rather than feed on this chaos and incomprehensibility, was shrinking away from it, burrowing fearfully in the past. It was like I was witnessing a modern-day rappel à l'ordre, a return to order, but rather than a retreat to academic classicism, the arts had fled to the safe, institutionally validated harbors of New York's post-war avant-garde. What should contemporary art be for? I believe contemporary art should tell us things about the nature of the world today, even if indirectly or unintentionally. And to that end, it needs to aspire toward a kind of modernity, continually finding new forms, new media, and new procedures that befit the unique structure of the present. This necessarily means courting ambiguity, even tastelessness and complicity. Like a lot of people, I enjoy Georgia O'Keeffe's paintings of Manhattan from the 1920s. Made while she was living with Alfred Stieglitz in the Shelton Hotel on Lexington Avenue, these prismatic explosions of light are terrifying paeans to the new machine age. In them, O'Keeffe's ecstasy is palpable. She is not critical of her capitalist metropolitan reality. She is thrilled by it, turned on by it. I would like to see more contemporary art adopting a similar attitude, letting itself be thrilled by the present, and, in so doing, opening fresh pathways of expression adequate to the strange, unmappable shape of our world.
Hi, I'm Carly Busta. I'm a co-founder of New Models. From 2014 to 2017, I was the editor-in-chief of Texte zur Kunst in Berlin. And from 2008 to 2014, I was an associate editor at Art Forum magazine in New York. Lately, artist friends have been leaving Berlin. Market reconfiguration, rising rents, and intensified political conditions have strained art making here. In turn, my husband and I, who live in Berlin with no immediate plans of moving, have been the recipients of a few incredible pieces of art. However, these works, as with much of our collection, are technically no longer art. They are either slightly damaged and/or exhibition prints and/or not signed, and so cannot circulate on the market, i.e., they can never be sold. But at some point, they briefly stood in for art, physically experiencing a flash of halogen-lit cultural fame while communicating an idea and a network to an audience. The official non-art status of much of the art in our home hardly matters to me, though. For one, I have no interest in selling the pieces that have come into our lives, a mix of art and non-art by the likes of Marcel Broodters and Anna Imhoff, Tobias Spichtig, Torbjörn Rotlin, Josephine Pride, Bernadette Corporation, Loretta Fahrenholtz, Wolfgang Tillmans, Trevor Paglen, Kalle Henkel and Max Pittigoff, Simon Denny, Albert Olin, and possibly, though the provenance is dubious, Marcel Duchamp, among others. But moreover, I decreasingly believe in the art market as any kind of arbiter of what art is and isn't. I'm not invoking here some anti-capitalist claim to art's purity. Indeed, to be transmitted across time, art needs entanglement with systems of status and value. It's just that most truly contemporary art is no longer meaningfully in dialogue with the classic high-net-worth individual-driven art market. Think of Anna Imhoff's productions and her masterful aggregation of other artists and cultural producers. Her studio, a network meganode, an autonomous creative platform and media machine powerful enough to weight the algorithmic channels. Or think of artists Kalle Henkel and Max Pittigoff, who self-reinforce their own scene on a more local scale, constructing bars and theaters, which they then staff and program, seating physical places and a Warholian cast of stars that become resources for the books, films, and photographs they make. With both of these examples, Imhoff and Henkel Pittigoff, the work is relevant not just for its aesthetic and thematic qualities, but for its ability to offer an effective protocol of transmission. An even more contemporary expression of this can probably be found in Angelicism's film 01, which discerningly and continuously folds in the activity of those within the Angelicism orbit, as well as the headless online flow of milady posting that exists in centrifugal relation to Remilia Corporation. In previous decades, the circulation of art was largely dependent on a dealer-critic system ratified by publications that collectively defined who, what, and where the art world was. By the mid-2010s, however, nearly all of the major outlets in that sector, a list that includes Art in America, Art News, Art Forum, Bomb, Flash Art, Frieze, Modern Painters, Moose, Parquet, The Village Voice, found that due to the new attentional physics of online social media, they could no longer produce an audience in the way they once had. Yes, people still read and subscribed, but more and more out of a sense of duty rather than desire. And any effective protocol of transmission must understand at its core desire. I would never sell the work in our collection as I desire membership in the networks and conversations it represents. The fact that the pieces are unofficial and could only be attained through personal proximity, i.e. participation in the artist's networks, makes them, in my view, all the more valuable. What is contemporary art for today? Nothing, I'd say, if not channeling and giving form to the emergent spirits of new networks.
Spichtig, New Models, Seaport Talks, text, take 5. What is contemporary art for today? What is contemporary art for today? What is contemporary art for today? Art is for nothing and everything, useless and useful. It's what makes life and existing conscious and magic. It's like the breathing for all human thoughts and minds. I'm sure elephants, ants, wolves, cats, or fish and trees have a kind of art, something we can't decipher, but which is always in the moment, like meditating outside of one's body and admiring the world. Today, it feels like there's finally no contemporary anymore. It's been replaced by a radical presence in the now, which implies a past as a future and a future as a past. The big thing now is and will be the spiritual. Almost like hippies, but not. Almost like religion, but not. Art feels like love again. One can't entirely know why, and if one would know, it would be gone. All magic would be lost. The magic that is in everything. Just that beautiful magic, that's what it's for.
What is contemporary art for today, and what should it be for, if anything? Edited by Matt Moravec, Eleonore Hugendubel, and Dean Kissick, and published by the Perić Collection, is available now and contains many more contributions. Thank you to Ben Davis, Gavin Brown, Jason Farago, Tobias Spichtig, Joshua Citarella, and Lloyd Wise for your readings. This has been a New Models production. The episode was produced by Carly Busta, with editing, mixing, and sound design by Lil Internet. To hear the accompanying conversation with the book's editors and access all of New Models episodes, including the hundreds in our archive, find us on Patreon or Substack, or visit our website at newmodels.io.